underdogs, underestimated, we the ones.
It's the Underdogs back with you for another week. I'm Jordan Brenner, joined as always by Peter Keating. And later in the show, we're going to look at some MLB playoff races. We've got our second edition of Nailed It, where we look at something Peter actually got right. But first, can you feel it, Peter?
Jordan, I'm about ready to smell it. Don't you smell the sweat in the Underdogs and Underdogs Central gaining and dripping off the walls?
It's football time. It's almost into the second week in August.
Mm-hmm.
Training camps are full bore. We've got videos of fights at camps. We've got rookies who are going to be unbelievable. All the hype, all the excitement. Every team is going to hit their over. But that's not really true, is it, Peter?
No, although every year I say this, Jordan, if you go through the expert preseason picks, we won't name the places, but you know the places that make preseason picks online, right? If you go through and you add up all of the wins that they project for all of the teams, you will get an average of more than 8.5 wins a team. Every team season preview is, well, if this goes right, if this goes right, if this goes, nobody ever writes or talks about like, well, if this guy collapses, if this guy sucks, you know, they'll win 4 games. So we have to balance our preseason optimism with the fact that the whole league does still add up to 500, Jordan. I mean, and I think we realize that, right?
Thanks for the advanced analysis, but I agree.
Jordan, now look, on every coin, there's a tails and a heads.
Now, look, we are the Underdogs podcast. Last year, one of our best hits was we took an early look at teams we thought that could have big turnarounds that weren't among the obvious ones. And we absolutely nailed it with the Texans, and we hit on the Colts too. So it's a lot of pressure for us this year to try to follow through on a couple surprise teams who no one's looking at. So
I thought you might be wearing a CJ Stroud jersey today.
That's right. That's going in the Brenner greatest hits collection for sure. Now, Peter, I want to divide this into 2 pieces. In part to keep
I will agree to that. Let's divide this into 2 pieces.
In part to keep you on track, because you know every now and then you tend to run a little long, and we have a segment that has to end, and Sarah, our producer, starts frantically typing in the chat that we got to wrap. So this will help keep track of that.
Wait, we have a chat
because there's 2 categories as well.
There's 2 categories in a chat. Okay, I can stick with that.
So let's first start where there's a few teams who struggled last season, who have a whole bunch of signs that they should be better this year, but for whom those signs are already sort of baked into their over-under totals. And so the question is whether there's still value in them, or has the over-under moved so much with sentiment that there's not worth betting on. So let's start with the first one. That's the Atlanta Falcons. Okay. Perhaps nobody's been as hyped as they've been. They went 7-10 last year. Obviously they added Kirk Cousins and then drafted another quarterback. They also have the easiest strength of schedule coming this season. And credit to our good friend Warren Sharp at Sharp Football Analysis, who does a piece every year on rest advantage, how many more days of rest they have over the course of their games than their
now
opponents.
Wait, just take 20 seconds to explain that in English, because
you explain it.
Well, I mean, look, Jordan, sometimes you're playing a team coming off a short week, right? Sometimes a very short week, or vice versa. And you'd expect all of those advantages to balance out over the course of a season, but Warren has shown that they do not. That scheduling advantages actually pile up for some teams and lag behind for others in kind of big ways.
So the Falcons have a +5 day rest advantage, which is big. So all of that being said, and they're in a weak division, but their over-under is 9.5. So that's 2.5 more wins than last season. Their Pythagorean win-loss last year was only 7-10. So I don't know. Is it worth betting on them to win 10 games?
No, in a word. Look, Arizona, Atlanta was involved in a number of games that were excruciatingly close, right? But on balance, it's hard to see them improving by that much, right? Look, outside of their wacky first pick, they had a good draft. They addressed some of the needs that everyone thought they were going to take care of with their first round pick. But that's kind of a big leap to make, isn't it? I mean, it's this a playoff team? That's what you're basically asking, right?
Well, I think they could win that division, but it's such a weak division. But I hear you. You know what? Let's look at it this way, Peter. There are 6 teams whose over-unders are 2.5 wins or more than the number of games they won last year. Okay. So that's the Chargers, who went 5-12, and their over-under is now 8.5. The Panthers, who won 2 games, and now they're projected for 5.5.
Mm-hmm.
The Cardinals won 4 games, projected for 7. We mentioned the Falcons. The Jets won 7 games, projected for 9.5. And the Commanders won 4 games, projected for 6.5. So if I told you, we talked about Atlanta. If I asked you to take one of those 5 teams that you'd actually be most confident in betting, even with the marked up market, who would it be?
Okay, well, let me explain why first, okay?
Yeah.
Because we're going to knock out some of those teams right away. What many of those teams have in common, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The Chargers, Carolina, Arizona, is that they fell short of where they should have been last year. Now, look, there's a bunch of reasons for it, but it comes down to this. All of those teams had a terrible record in close games, okay? And in close games, literally, they can go either way. The ball bounces one way or another, the team wins or loses, right? So if you're really bad or really good in close games one year, you're going to be much more close to average the next year. That's not a sustainable thing to happen. The Chargers lost every close game you can imagine last year. It cost the coach his job, right? It got players shipped out of there. They finished 5-12. They should have won around 7 games. But here's the thing. The market's already expecting them to win 8.5 games this year. Like you said, these teams, the Chargers, Carolina, Arizona, what the over-under is telling you is the market realizes they were all due for a bounce up. The market's already telling you they're going to bounce up. Now, the Jets are a different category. Last year, Jordan, when we did it, you and I did a piece for The Athletic, okay, on backup
I think we did.
We did.
It was a great piece.
It was a fine piece. Got into the print edition of the New York Times. Made my family proud, okay? We broke down teams, different categories of how much each team had suffered by playing backup quarterbacks. Our editors at The Athletic gave the Jets section its own section. And the headline for that section in our story was, "The Jets get their own section," because we calculated there was a 232-point difference, okay, in offense alone between what a regular season of Aaron Rodgers would have given the Jets and what the guys they trotted out last year were giving the Jets. Now, look, this is preseason. It's time for optimism. It's a time to have happy fan amnesia. Do you even remember Zach Wilson? Do you even remember Tim Boyle?
Oh, I do.
These are the worst.
Jets fans do as well, sadly.
I mean, there was no even Tommy DeVito level excitement about them. They were horrible. They stunk. Just by replacing, even if you put a replacement level quarterback in there, the Jets would have bounced up. They just have a good defense. They won 7 games, even with the quarterbacks they were playing. Right. So I think it's easy to see them beating their over-under of 9.5. They could win 10 or 11 games just because the talent's so much better.
Right. As we said, that could potentially have the best defense in the league. The biggest weaknesses beyond the quarterback situation were the offensive line, which they addressed.
They have addressed.
They got an additional receiver in Mike Williams if he's healthy. Breece Hall is a star running back. Garrett Wilson is just waiting for someone to throw him the ball. The other thing they have in their arsenal, they have the 4th easiest schedule in the league.
Yeah,
and they have a rest.
How does that even work?
They have a rest advantage of plus 5 days. So a lot of things are pointing in the Jets.
Are you saying the only big weak link or question mark with the Jets is now the quarterback?
I was about to say well, there's 2 things. One, they're the Jets. So if anyone can just find a way to screw this up, it's them. But yes, if I don't know, quarterback decides to go off bear hunting with RFK Jr. at some point, like that could screw the entire thing up.
Let's hope nobody gets left in a park at the end of that trip.
Right. So yes, I agree with you. Of those 6 teams, I think I'd be most comfortable putting a bet on the Jets. I guess so over 9.5 for 10 wins. The others are tough. I really do think the Commanders are going to be improved. I really do think the Cardinals are going to be improved. The Panthers can't be worse, but I think that's the place to go. Is there any other one of those teams that catch your eye before we move on to a couple of our under the radar picks?
No, because for just the reason you said, these teams could hardly be worse. So they're going to get better but their over-unders are already better. So
Right.
those are tough teams to bet on. You're chasing a
Okay.
market that's already moved up.
Okay. Now, again, we're not talking about teams that might like win 12 games. That's not what we do. We're looking for underdogs. Okay. So forget about, whether the Chiefs will go over under 11 and a half, right? But there's one team that's like right on the cusp of the teams that it's baked in, but not as high as those ones we just talked about. But also they're not totally off the radar like a couple teams we're going to talk about next. And that's the Chicago Bears. And it's a fascinating situation. Okay. First of all, last year they went 7-10. Probably didn't realize they weren't that bad. And their Pythagorean record, as you explained, they should have been 8-9. Okay. Their over under is only 8.5. So on the one hand, we're only asking them to win one more game than they should have last year and two more games than they actually did. And we all know they added number one pick, quarterback Caleb Williams, who, God, if he could have a CJ Stroud like impact, who knows what's happening there. We know that they added Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze. They actually have the best passing game potentially they've ever had. On the other hand, there could be some offensive line issues. The defense improved in the second half last year, but may still have some weaknesses. The other things, though, third easiest schedule and also a +5 rest advantage. So the question is, we know they're going to be better. How many more wins will that translate into, especially in a division that has the Lions and the Packers already?
I think they'll hit the over under. I think I can see them adding 2 games. Caleb Williams is an all-time talent. Nobody should expect him to have a CJ Stroud season. If he doesn't have a CJ Stroud season, people start talking about him as a disappointment. That's insane because one person has had a CJ Stroud season as a rookie. That's CJ Stroud.
Mhm.
However, all the weapons are there. The schedule's lined up. The rest of the division maybe isn't as great as people think. At least I don't think Detroit is. Detroit was a little lucky last year. They got it all lined up, and I believe in the quarterback. So and look, a lot of teams you draft that high and get a great young quarterback. It's because you strip down all your other assets. This case was the reverse. They got a Dunze and they added other talent around him. They're not building from nothing.
Well, I already see the clock running. So real quick, Peter, let's get to our 2 under the radar picks. Okay, last year we took, as we mentioned, 2 teams from the AFC South. This year, I think we're going to stay in the same division again, but the NFC South with 2 teams. Explain these 2 teams who nobody's paying attention to as our favorite dark horses of the year.
All right. So, Jordan, look, instead of chasing a market that's already moved up, let's find the gems in the markets for teams that are still depressed. If you look for teams that did not win as many games as they should last year, so they're due for a bounce up, but where the over under this year is still lower than the number of games they won last year. In other words, the market is still expecting them to decline, right? Instead of improve. And that had a good offseason and have an easier strength of schedule than league average. You only have 2 teams left. Those teams are the Saints and the Bucs. I love both of these picks. The Saints with an over-under of 7.5, despite winning 9 games last year. They said goodbye to a bunch of players they didn't really need. Jameis Winston, Andres Pete, even Michael Thomas, only 63rd in the league in receptions, in targets last year. They extended and kept and signed who they wanted to, including Tyrone Matthew and Chase Young. They still got Derek Carr, who's always been underrated as a quarterback, and they had a good draft. So what's not to like? What's not to see an improvement there? And there's
some really interesting splits in Derek Carr's career in his first year with a coordinator or coach, and then his second year. So I think that bodes well for him. And yeah, in Tampa, everybody's raving about their offseason, yet they fly under the radar. So
you must like Graham Barton, right? I mean, he's the best center in the draft. He's from Duke. He might play left guard. But they also drafted Chris Braswell, who, again, a little under the radar because he was on the opposite side of Dallas Turner in Alabama. I love Jalen McMillan, the receiver they got out of Washington in the 3rd round. So they had a good draft, too. And they re-signed Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Levante David. And they're using the guys they got in the draft to replace some of the guys they had to let go, like Shaq Barrett. So, again, Tampa Bay was a little bit unlucky last year. They played until they got into like close to playoff contention. They were not playing well in close games. And the market is still pretty low on them. So, yeah, I like both those picks.
Plus, again, you're banking on a weak division there, one that probably should have a lot of chaos. It was the exact same thoughts we had last year with the Colts and the Texans of how things sort out. So even though last year Jacksonville was sort of thought to be, a pretty clear favorite, which didn't manifest this year, I guess the feeling again is with Atlanta, but that defense still has some issues. Adding Kirk Cousins and a rookie backup quarterback, and hopefully giving the ball to Bijan Robinson more doesn't solve all their problems. So this is an interesting, both as a hedge against Atlanta and a belief in some of the things these teams have done. So I'm excited.
Halfway through the season, don't you think Atlanta's going to be thinking, wow, we should have used our #1 draft pick on an impact defensive rookie?
Unless he's playing. But let's table
then
this.
They'll be in really big trouble.
We will take one more look at Underdogs on the eve of the season once we get through training camp and digest injuries and news and everything else. But right now, maybe take a look at those Tampa and New Orleans overs. Keep an eye on the teams where the overs are already baked in, and we'll be previewing the NFL all month. But it's time to turn to baseball right after this. We're back, and so are the baseball playoff races. They're heating up, and Peter, I want to get your thoughts, and I have an interesting way to look at this. At least I think it's interesting.
Well, that's one vote. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at the teams that aren't currently in the playoffs. Okay, so in the American League, it's 3 division winners, and then the 3 wild cards right now are the Orioles, the Twins, and the Royals. Okay, in the National League, you have your 3 division leaders, and then you've got the Padres, Diamondbacks, and Braves in the wild card spots. So, of the rest of the teams, who has the best shot at making the playoffs and who's the best bet? Do you want me to read the odds for the playoff for the teams that are so we give you an idea of what you're choosing from?
For the small minority of our listeners who are not already asleep, why don't you read?
I'll read the odds. All right, if you want to bet on these teams to make the playoffs, you can get the Red Sox at -110.
You want some background music for this?
The Astros are -130. The Rays +900. The Rangers +1,000, and the Tigers are +2,500.
Tigers.
In the NL, the Mets are +135, the Cardinals +350, the Pirates +800, the Giants +500, the Reds +1,200, the Cubs +1,100, and your Washington Nationals are +2,500. Everybody else is
Yes.
10 games out or more.
Yeah, I missed on the Nationals. I thought they were going to be like a 65 win team. So we should just say to be playing well enough to even be on this list. What is it? First week in August. What a good season.
All right, so if I asked you to put your hard-earned money on one team in the AL from that list and one team in the NL to make the playoffs, who would they be and why?
I think clearly the best teams involved are the Astros to win the division in the AL West and the Mets to make the playoffs in the NL East. They're just playing the best, and they're the best constructed. But
those are the shortest odds.
Those are the shortest odds. So that's not the best value.
Well, to be clear, also, Peter, just to put home how short the odds are on the Astros, they're -130 to make the playoffs. The Mariners, who are currently leading the division, are -110. So you get better odds betting.
So the market actually likes them to win, even though they're 2 games out at the moment. These things fluctuate day to day.
And they're 4 out in the wild card, by the way, not for nothing. So
the Astros, and they're rotating. I mean, Framber Valdez almost pitched a no-hitter the night before we're talking. Their rotation's back in order. They got it going on. But that's not where the value is, as you just pointed out. I think the value is with the Rays.
Oh my God, League, the Rays
and the Cubs in the National League. Here's why.
Okay.
Because if you look at the odds as estimated by analytics sites like Fangraphs for teams to make the playoffs, they're basically in line with the market. But the best value bets are the Rays at +900 because they got about an 8% chance to make the playoffs. And the Cubs, who also have about that percentage chance to make the playoffs, but are +1,100. And I'll mention also, their run differentials are good. The Cubs have better run differential than I think one of the best run differential.
+1. And the Rays are -44, though. The Rays also 4.5 games out of the wild card. The Cubs 6 games out.
But here's why I bring them both up also. The reason that they're a little undervalued by the market is because both of those teams, if anything, sold off a bit during the trade deadline. The Cubs got rid of Mark Leiter. They didn't look to improve. The Rays sold half their team. But with the Rays, how can you tell if they're buying or selling? They sell off half their team, and then the guys who they replace them with play just as well as the guys who came before. And this brings up the question to me: if you have about a 10% chance to make the playoffs, teams are taking that as a sign to kind of cash in. But why shouldn't it have been a sign to improve by 2 or 3 games? If these teams are 2 or 3 games better or improved by a small margin, they'd be right in the middle of the playoff hunt. So the market's undervaluing them a little because the market, as I am, are disappointed in these teams, but they still have really good shots as opposed to their odds on places like DraftKings.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a little different tack here. As long as in the American League, we're going to take a bit of a long shot. Let's go with the Rangers. They're only 5 games out of the division. They're plus 1,000 to make the playoffs. And supposedly these pitching reinforcements, DeGrom and Scherzer and yada, 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 are all going to be coming through. So, look, they have to get hot now. But this is a World Series winning team. We know they have a lot of talent. We know those pitchers, if they come back healthy, you're banking on something unlikely to happen by taking someone to plus 1,000. At least you could see a path with the Rangers in the National League.
But Josh Smith has been their best player all season. I mean, I'm a Wyatt Langford super fan. I love DeGrom, but I've been waiting all season for this team to put 5 hits together in one inning and have one crooked inning. They're supposed to hit. They're supposed to hit.
Not like the Rays have played well all season. There's a reason they sold. Here in the National League, you want to talk about a team that's underperforming. You may have heard us mention them 17 times this year, but the Reds are still in it. They're 5.5 out of the wild card. They've outscored their opponents by 41 runs. The time is now, Reds. They're plus 1,200. All right. Can I make one more bet on them? They can get past the Giants and the Pirates by next week. And then you're just looking and knocking out one of those wild card teams, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, or the Braves. I think the Braves are decimated by injuries and ready to crumble. So give me the Reds plus 1,200. Why not?
Jordan, this week, we're talking on a Wednesday. So far this week, L.A. De La Cruz is hitting 800 with 6 extra base hits. Nobody wants to face them in the playoffs, but they gotta put a few wins together in a row soon.
Agreed. Well, you know who's put a couple wins together in a row?
You and me, baby.
Yeah, that's right. Because we are back with another installment of Nailed It. Think you can nail it? Head over to our friends at DraftKings for the best odds and lines, especially on futures markets. New customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code Underdogs in partnership with DraftKings. The crown is yours. And Peter, the crown is yours this week for, I know you know a lot about a lot of things. I did not have the triple jump on my bingo board.
Jordan, it's a fantastic story of these Olympics. A woman named Thea LaFond, graduate of the University of Maryland, has been in 3 Olympics. At some point, she was one of only 2 athletes competing for her country. Her country is Dominica, not the Dominican Republic, as we've said before, a small country in the Caribbean. And they only send a couple of people to the Olympics. But this year, everything broke right. Thea LaFond was improving in every meet. She won the World Indoor Championships. And sadly, the queen of the triple jump, woman who won gold medal after gold medal in competitions, ruptured her Achilles tendon. So the door was wide open, as we said, Jordan, not just for somebody to walk through, but for an underdog to hop, skip, and jump through. And that's what she did. Triple jump is exciting because it's not an aggregate score. You take your best score. So she jumped over 15 meters, personal best at the Olympics. And then they had to wait. She had to wait through 3 more rounds of all the competitors trying to do better, and they didn't do it. So look, we've seen Cole Hocker now in the 1,500 meters, right? Surprise win. We've seen Julian Alfred, the runner from St. Lucia, who won her country's first medal ever in the 100 meters. We've seen some terrific underdog competition with the Albanian wrestlers who we love still coming up. And so it's been dominance, but also underdogs at this Olympics. And nobody's a better story than Thea LaFond in the women's triple jump.
And then the other cool thing was the viral video of her brother who plays football at Navy reacting to her winning. If you haven't seen it, Google that one, because it was a very, very cool reaction from him, sort of enjoying her moment. But Peter, gosh, if you're now nailing triple jump picks, what's next for you? Are we
Jordan, let's just get the Mets into the playoffs and then we'll see what happens. But no, there were lines on this. She was plus 400. So that counts as an actual underdog bet, I think.
Yeah. So Peter, after picking the gold medal winner in Thea LaFond, I think it's time to post some breaking bets before the Olympics ends.
We need some breaking news. B girl Sissy. I mean, you give me a couple of dancers. We'll do the moves. We'll get producer Sarah to break out some floor moves. And Jordan, I'll be back next week, Mike, with breaking news.
We will be back together for more puns next week.
It's an honor just to be on the podium, Jordan, with you.